What's up guys, I'm Laura from Reading in Bed, and yes, this video is going to be poorly lit, but honestly I've been trying to film it for 6 days now, and because what I'm doing is reviewing the book section in the Saturday newspaper, if I don't do it today, it's going to be like the following Saturday, and it's really going to be irrelevant if it isn't already. And this is all inspired by the videos that Steve Donahue's been doing on his channel. Now, if you want actual timely newspaper reviews, I guess you could call it, you should head on over to his channel. He started out just looking at the book section in the New York Times, but he's expanded now that he's covering parts of the front section and covering the reviews section, which is basically just a bunch of op-eds and random people writing short essays. So as you can imagine, if you know Steve, you know he's got opinions and he is not shy about sharing them. I don't always agree with him either, but you know, he speaks his mind. And I gotta say, like, his New York Times kind of review last week, he pointed me towards a story that I otherwise might not have read. It's about busing in the United States. So this was sort of like how states and the federal government had to force desegregation in schools. And I guess, like, intellectually I knew what that was, but I didn't really know. So Steve said, you know, this is a really well-written article, go read it. I did. I'm glad I did. So I'll link to that and everything else we talk about today. But anyways, enough preamble. What I wanted to do today was look at some Canadian newspapers. And I'm just going to stick to the books because, you know, obviously it took me 6 days to even get in front of a camera. We're just gonna like do what we can, get through this together. So what we're gonna take a look at is the Globe and Mail arts and books section. And again, only the book stuff. I'm not even touching movies, TV, any of that. And then I pulled out this single page from the Edmonton Journal that had some books coverage on Saturday. So I think I want to start with the Globe, and I just to make sure I don't miss anything, I do have a little list going here. So of course, the cover story, Big Audiobooks Dynamite. Now that's a pun about an old band that, like, I hardly even know. So, but anyways, audiobooks is kind of a big front page story. And it actually becomes a theme throughout the book section, which is odd. Usually, unless I've been missing something, the book sections don't have themes, but this one definitely does, and it's definitely audiobooks. So this first article, of course, there's just like a tiny bit of text, and then it continues. It's about, well, it's hard to say what exactly this article is about. Like, it's a huge 2-page spread with tons of pictures. I guess I should, yeah, do it this way. It is about the production of one particular audiobook called I Become a Delight to My Enemies by Sarah Peters. It's a debut novel. She's a poet from Nova Scotia, I think from Cape Breton Island. And the book is put out by a brand new, well, not a new publishing house, like an imprint of Penguin Random House, but it's specifically for more experimental stuff. It's kind of linked to Hazlitt, which is an online literary magazine, which I don't think that's Canadian. I don't think the publisher's Canadian, but the author's Canadian. So I guess that's why part of why this became a story. The other one, as you can probably tell from the pictures, is that this is like a full, you know, kind of multi-voice actor narrative. Kind of like Lincoln in the Bardo, although I think they've got 10 voice actors here, not like 150 or whatever they had on Lincoln in the Bardo. And also, like, unless I'm missing something, none of these folks are like super well known, whereas of course Lincoln in the Bardo had lots of celebrities. So yeah, this first article was a bit like, when I was scanning it, I'm like, well, what is this about? The audiobook? Is it about the publisher? Is it about, you know, the interview with the author? It's like a whole bunch of things mashed together. So yeah, this was kind of a weird article, but if you can just take a minute and let yourself get into it, it is interesting, and really nice photography. Although again, I don't recognize any of the voice actors. I'm not sure if I was supposed to. But anyhow, so that's the first article about audiobooks. And then we get to this one, Audiobooks Come of Age. This is a super long, like, this is kind of, you know, that one was a 2-page spread, but most of it was pictures. This is a 3-page spread, and I mean, there's lots of pictures too, but not nearly as many. There's a lot of text here. This is one of the longest, like, I'm trying to think back to a books article that's this long. It's the longest one I remember seeing in a while. And this is the kind of article and the kind of approach to writing about books that I really like. This author, Ian Brown, takes a specific book, The Milkman, and talks about it as an audiobook and how it works as an audiobook and how it might work better or differently, let's say, than the print book. So, you know, like approaching something like that, like a concept like audiobooks with a specific example, kind of combining a review and a commentary. And because Milkman is a book that I want to read, I was like, oh, this is great, and look how long it is, and you know, it's getting into it. Started out really good, lots of stuff about Milkman and, you know, what it's about and how long it is and the accents and all that kind of thing. But then in the middle, and in the middle of this article is very long, there's just a bunch of like gobbledygook about audiobooks. It's very bizarre. So I'm going to read you this one paragraph that was the first one that I was like, what? Okay, so that's the first commandment of the audiobook kingdom. If you have always wanted to read a classic but could never engage, try listening to it instead. It doesn't always work. Fact-filled nonfiction can be a dry listen, especially if it's verveless stylistically, and some novels don't translate well to audio. Olga Tokarczuk's Flights, a novel about a woman who travels incessantly, is too aphoristic to work in the ear. So leaving aside the fact that there's like 3 different ideas in that paragraph that don't even go together, like first he's talking about classics, then he's talking about nonfiction, then he's talking about like a contemporary, you know, well, novel. We'll get to that in a sec, but so like, what are you saying? Are you saying audiobooks are good for classics, but not other books? But his characterization of Flights is so bizarre and so incorrect. Like, even objectively speaking, Flights is not a novel. It's not about a single woman. There are women in it, but like to say it's about a woman who travels incessantly, it's not. Like, there's lots of different things and people it's about. It is about travel, but incessantly is a weird way of putting it. And aphoristic, okay, I did have to Google just to make sure I was like, you know, defining that word correctly, but to my understanding of the word, it's like the opposite of that. It's not putting things too neatly or trying to express things as a moral or a like pithy kind of saying. It's like the exact opposite of that. So yeah, I was, once I got to that paragraph, I was like, okay, what is going on here? And then the second one I wanted to draw to your attention, just a few paragraphs down, he says, the choice of narrator can make or ruin an audiobook. Sometimes an author is an even more compelling reader than she is a writer. Tanya Tagak's performance of her memoir Splittooth is riveting, and sometimes she is not. Anna Kana Schofield reading Bina. Canadian audiobooks are increasingly ambitious. Wayne Johnson's First Snow, Last Light features 4 readers, including David Ferry, Mary Lewis, and Gordon Pinsent. So the funny thing in this one is that Anna Kana Schofield saw this and tweeted about it, so I'll link to that if you're interested. Nothing gets by her. But again, I mean, like, just throwing that out there and not saying why is sort of just a weird thing to do. And then again, like saying an audiobook is necessarily ambitious if it has more than one narrator, I mean, I guess. And then listing those narrators, am I supposed to know who they are? So yeah, like, and then it goes on, like there's a 3rd page to this, and it just, like it comes back, and the very last line of it is break the tradition and listen to the book you always meant to read, which I guess is the point of the article, and one I can appreciate, one that I like. I liked when he was talking about Milkman, but everything else in here is just like totally weird. So yeah, that was kind of the bulk of the book's coverage here. Just a couple more things in the Globe. There's a little throwaway article called How Kids Audiobooks Bring My Family Together. And it just talks about Harry Potter. I mean, yeah, I guess. My kids listen to audiobooks too, but they're like Five Nights at Freddy's audiobooks, and I do not want to listen to those. So for me, the audiobook is like, go to bed and listen to this. I've already read to you for half an hour or an hour and I'm done. So I guess it's not bringing my family together and I'm doing it wrong, but whatever. And then finally, there's 2 actual book reviews, because we haven't had an actual book review yet. Just 2 of them on kind of the last page here. The first one is for a book called This Wicked Tongue by Elise Levine, and it's reviewed by Jade Colbert, who's a frequent reviewer in the Globe. This is a really good review. Not to say that it's completely positive, because it does have some criticism, but it's good in that Jade Colbert quickly summarizes, puts it in context. It is a short story collection, and she kind of goes beyond the obvious, you know, Alice Munro and that kind of comparison, and compares it to Karen Russell, is that right? Yeah, Swaplandia, as well as Paige Cooper's Solitude, which is a more obscure book, but it was nominated for the Giller Prize last year. So like for people who read Canlit and are into Canlit, it's just sort of respecting that and like saying, yeah, you know, I'm going to make references to things that might be a little obscure for the general audience, but if you read a lot of Canlit, you're going to get it. And even if you don't, it's still a very accessible review. So I really like that one. And then the last one in the Globe is a review of a book called Mescaline, A Global History of the First Psychedelic. And this review was really bad because it's not even really a review. It's just this guy kind of talking about his experiences with LSD and stuff. And I mean, like, honestly, it's like dreams. Like, it's not interesting to anyone but yourself. And he just like has very little to say about the book. He kind of summarizes it, so you get a sense of what the book's about. But I did not get a sense from this if the book is any good or if it's something I'd be interested in. There does seem to be a trend of books about psychedelics from various perspectives. And so far, none of them have really, you know, like I could be interested in that, but none of the books I've seen have made me think, oh yeah, this is something I want to check out. So anyways, that was the Globe. So, oh no, sorry. There's one more in the Globe that actually I really wanted to talk about. So on the back page, good thing I wrote these down, right? A Celebration of Wolves. So this is an article about the newly published manuscript edition of Mrs. Dalloway, which those of you on BookTube will know that Eric Carl Anderson recently did a video. I don't even know if I want to call it a review, but like a, you know, a tribute, I guess, to this manuscript being published. And, you know, he kind of staged his own Dalloway Day and showed us things in London and talked about the book and what it meant to him. And it was really, really lovely. So when I saw this, I was like, oh, you know, I bet this won't be as good as Eric Carl Anderson's video. And it's different, but actually I think they're very complementary to each other. So if you liked Eric's video, maybe do check out this link. It'll probably be paywalled, but you know, because it's a little bit more about that Dalloway Day concept, because it's a book that takes place over a day. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't say which day, so that kind of makes it harder to do than Bloomsday. The only thing I didn't like about this article is that there's an author, bookstore owner, Alison Devers, who's extensively quoted in here, and she wrote a really bad article about Jonathan Franzen a couple years ago, and I wrote about that on the blog. I had some issues with it, so when I saw her name, I was like, But, you know, I mean, she does run a bookshop that exclusively sells women's book. I think it's actually called The Second Shelf, you know, which, again, those of us on BookTube will be familiar with that phrase, right? So I wouldn't say, like, don't read it because of that. That's just a very personal thing. So yeah, this was another good article, another fairly long one, like most of the page. So some pretty decent books coverage. It's not every week that you get that much. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less. Now, moving on very quickly to the Edmonton Journal, and it won't take long because there's really not much. So we got one page in the Saturday Journal. One is a book review and one is just sort of a roundup. Now, the book review is of a book called Reckoning, The Epic Battle Against Sexual Abuse and Harassment by Linda Hirschman. And I think I read a review, like a more serious kind of review of this somewhere, like maybe Book Forum or something. I'll have to take a look. But, you know, immediately I'm like, well, okay, like why are we reviewing this obviously American book in a Canadian newspaper? And it even, like, I didn't underline the quote, but there's somewhere in here where it just sort of says, like, oh, you know how since Me Too started, this is like, you know, this conversation has been happening and it really kickstarted everything. Whereas from a Canadian perspective, it was Gomeshi that kickstarted that in recent years, not Me Too. Like, we were already all over it by the time Me Too came along. So the review just sort of, you know, didn't ring very true from a Canadian perspective. Other than that, it was fine. It was mixed, you know, some good things, some bad. Whenever I see like a nonfiction title like this that's examining an event or a phenomenon and it's only been a couple of years, I'm always pretty wary. Like, I don't think enough time has passed, honestly, to really take a clear-eyed look at something like Me Too that, I mean, what was it, 3 years ago or something? So yeah, that there was that review, fairly long, and then I looked at right at the bottom. It says the Washington Post. So like, I think this is just something they grab off the wire service or whatever, which is why it's American. And then at the bottom, there's just a roundup of page turners to take to the beach, and they're all like, yeah, none of them really appealed to me. They're mostly in the thriller vein. I'm more interested in the New York Times beach reads, which I haven't even got to this yet, and yeah, it's Friday, so anyways, yeah, that is it. This is getting long, so I'm going to end it. Don't know if I'll do this again. Maybe in the comments let me know if you found this interesting. I will put all the links if you want to go and read the articles, and yeah, do you read books coverage in your own newspaper? Thanks for watching.